hot for TV.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Doctor Who, Too Hot for TV. We're back this time to talk about the many deaths of the Seventh Doctor and his companion Ace. As everybody knows, Jack is no longer doing the podcast, and much like Have I Got News For You, I'm having guest co-hosts or guest hosts monthly. And this time I'm joined by none other than Iain from the All of Time and Space podcast. Hello, Iain.
Hello.
So when I reached out to you, I was like, is there anything you fancy doing? And we ummed and ahed about a few things, but ultimately we settled on Death Comes to Time. And I said, why don't we pair it up with the comic Ground Zero, because they both have kind of linking factors. So I would just like to know what kind of drew you to Death Comes to Time in particular.
So it's one of those really interesting kind of offshoots that came along at a very interesting time. I mean, maybe I'll ask you for your opinion, but at the time of Death Comes to Time, I was very much an X fan.
Right.
You know, I'd kind of given up on the magazine. We'd had the kind of twin car crashes of the TV movie and then Terence Sticks's Eighth Doctor novels. And I was a young man then. I wanted to be popular with, girls. And Doctor Who had just kind of disappeared from my life as an ongoing thing. And I think when this was like physically released, I was working in a bookshop with someone who was like one of the really early adopters of the Big Finish line, and I sort of had this, I wouldn't go anywhere near that nonsense anymore. But I did have a listen to Death Comes to Time, and we'll maybe talk about what I thought about it later on. But it struck me as a very genuinely interesting attempt to do something innovative at the time, and I didn't see that as being something that was being widely done elsewhere. So Death Comes to Time has always had a special place in my heart.
Beautiful. Let's backtrack a little bit. How did you get into Doctor Who, and what kind of is your era? The generic question that I ask everybody.
Oh, how marvellous.
It gives everybody a bit of context as to kind of what your tastes are and background, I guess.
My first memory is the cliffhanger to the end of part 1 of Full Circle,
right,
which I watched at my Auntie Janet's house. I'm pretty sure I'd seen some of season 17, because I can remember seeing the end credits and thinking, but it should be a big grey swirly tunnel. This is wrong.
Right.
My first full in and out Doctor was Peter Davison. I followed the show religiously through the 80s and couldn't bear to let it go in the 90s. So I was, I was all over the new adventures. I have since watched every episode of New Who, most of them many more than once. So I'm a sort of lifer. If you sort of link Doctor Who fandom to being a prisoner, I'm a Category A offender with no hope of parole.
I can see that. So what is your kind of relationship with the Seventh Doctor and Ace? I guess obviously you saw that series at the time, but I mean, what were your feelings at the time? What are your feelings now about them?
I think for me it's probably the most interesting and rewarding era of the show. At the time I was 11 or 12, and Time and the Rani episode 1 was kind of mortifyingly embarrassing. And there's that fairly well trodden truism that everyone got beaten up in the playground for watching Doctor Who in the late 80s. I certainly came close. And while I was aware that it was getting a lot better as that era unfolded, my personal favourite iteration of it was in the Virgin books.
Right.
And I think in the last 10 years, since everyone on the internet has started doing podcasts about Doctor Who, and you've got to hear lots and lots of people kind of reassessing those stories, it's kind of crystallised as this brief lacuna of real invention and innovation, and sophisticated things were happening, and there were some production downfalls and maybe some shortcomings in some of the performers, but on the whole what we were getting was really amazing. And if the BBC had advertised season 26 a little bit more, then the show might not have ever gone away.
Of course.
I look back on it now as, I suppose it is my favourite era. I hesitate to say that the Seventh Doctor is my favourite Doctor just because Matt Smith happened. But yeah, he probably is. Him and Ace. Not so much Ace, if we're being honest. But that era of the show, I think, is where it kind of broke free of the shackles of being Eric Saywood and John Nathan Turner's kind of circle jerk, and just took flight just at the right time to show me that the show could be much more than it was previously.
I mean, that's definitely my era of the show. The first, as the listeners of this podcast may remember, the first episode of Doctor Who I watched was Battlefield Episode 1, so I really jumped in at the tail end of the series. I would class Sylvester McCoy as my Doctor in terms of the classic Doctors.
Yeah.
But as you say, other people come along 30 years later who slightly trump in other places. So, first up we're going to talk about Ground Zero, which was a Doctor Who comic printed in DWM. Issues 238 to 242, the 11th of April to the 1st of August 1996. Now, this was a very interesting time for Doctor Who, because the headlines for all those issues of Doctor Who magazine were basically, Doctor Who's back! Doctor Who's back! When's Doctor Who going to be back again? And that's it. Because the TV movie happened. Just to kind of get your feel for it, like, what was your... I'm not asking for an in-depth review on the TV movie or anything like that, but what do you remember of that period in time where the TV movie was coming back? Had you drifted away? Were you still very much in Doctor Who fandom?
I was hugely in. I was about to lie then. I was going to say that because the New Adventures were building up to it, I was kind of caught in that momentum. But of course, the New Adventures weren't building up to it, and it would take about a year for them to start building up to something that had been broadcast. I remember going to the video shop. This was when I was at uni, so I'd trudge along to the newsagents in Canterbury like every Thursday for what felt like a month. And then the release date of the VHS kept being put back. And I watched it, and again with the caveat that I was very young, and I loved it. I really mainly because it was a thing that existed in the world, and it was back, and it was something you could show people and go, look at how brilliant our show is. So at that time I was just sort of sitting there waiting to hear that a full 22-week American TV series had been greenlit.
Which didn't quite happen. But there we go. The reason the video was delayed, and this is covered in the DWMs at the time, is that you remember Chang Lee's mates got shot, and that's since been reinstated for the DVD release and Blu-ray release and what have you. But at the time, there was a point where they were like, oh, the new Doctor Who's going to be a 15 and won't be able to be shown until after 9 o'clock, which obviously isn't what you want for a family-friendly TV show.
No, right. That does explain a lot. Although it doesn't take very long to edit some videotape. I mean, if you're going to make a few little cuts and remove a bit of gangland shooting, I don't see why that has to delay me as a customer with my $9.99 or however much it would have cost. I was there, I was ready.
I had an issue at the time that obviously that got delayed, but the script book and the novelisation arrived on time. So as like a 12-year-old or whatever I was trying not to read the whole of the novelisation or the script book because I wanted to watch it, but also I needed to know. I needed to know what was happening.
Absolutely. You're right. I remember reading the book a good couple of weeks before the movie happened. I didn't bother with the script book. I think even then I was able to pick and choose and curate what I needed and what I didn't.
Sensible.
But it was an exciting time.
It was an exciting time. Also kind of playing out over the course of those issues was the fact it became apparent that BBC Books were doing the novelisation of the film, which cast doubts over Virgin's licence being renewed because their licence was up for renewal in 1997. And if you go back to those issues of Doctor Who magazine, it's played out. You see it played out in real time, and they're hoping they're going to get their licence. They're hoping they're going to get it, and then ultimately the BBC take the licence back in-house, which is a shame. I think that's always been seen as a bit of a scandalous thing that they did there.
I hope so. I mean, I just fell into the sander for rabbit hole about an hour ago, so I've just been laughing along and reading the reviews of some of those early Eighth Doctor books. I think it was really terrible, and I say this as someone who until very recently worked in big trade publishing houses. It was just a really cynical cash grab by the BBC, and to put someone in charge of it who knew nothing about Doctor Who and had no agenda for the books, and the idea that they could just exist and be a thing was just really the latest in a long line of terrible things the BBC had done to fandom. They were happy to take on money. They were happy to get all that extra resource from a few thousand fans who they would do. I mean, you know, I was going to say they've done nothing for us. They would point to the very recently made movie and say, we made you this. But they didn't make it for us. They made it for wide audience, demographics. So the books coming back was a terrible thing for the BBC, and how they managed to keep it going as long as they did, I do not know. I know.
There were so many of them. I didn't realise this, but at the time, Doctor Who accounted for 5% of all science fiction books sold in the UK, which is a staggering amount, I would think.
That does sound like a lot. I mean,
it almost sounds like it might be a lie. Who knows?
I'm sure it isn't a lie. I think with book sales, with sci-fi, it's always the kind of more niche offering that a publisher will put out a bit of sci-fi, not really expecting too much and not really hopeful. The people that love those books will buy them, religiously, but it's not seen as one of the big kind of markets for trade publishing. So yes, Doctor Who would make up for a lot of it, and probably of that 5%, I would hazard a guess that 3% were sort of second-hand Target books, and the other 2% presumably were the new adventures, and then I'm guessing that figure would have dipped after people read the Eight Doctors.
So I've got to be honest with you, I'm a little bit younger than you, so I was probably about 12 when the Eight Doctors came out, and I couldn't get into New Adventures as a 12-year-old, but I found the Eight Doctors the most readable thing that I'd ever encountered of kind of new Doctor Who books. So I loved it. I never want to go back to it now, but although I'm sure someone will get me to cover it at some point on the podcast. I think for the majority of Doctor Who fans, it felt like a bad move. But I guess if you're trying to get kids into the show, slightly younger kids, then maybe it was a good move.
Well, so my argument is, and it's an argument I'll be using a lot in this podcast, but who is it for?
Yeah.
So let's look at that book. This is designed to ensnare people who enjoyed the TV movie. It's not really aimed at children because it's, I think they were, £4 or £5 at the time.
Right.
But it was a children's book written by, I don't want to dismiss Terence Dicks as a children's author, but his style of prose is very much geared to storytelling that's very readable for kids.
Yeah.
And, we all grew up reading Terence Dicks, and the man deserves a posthumous knighthood. But fundamentally, my argument is, who needs to revisit the end of Trial of a Time Lord and have that continuity changed during a book that's designed to introduce a completely different Doctor? What new fans are going to be attracted by a book that's nothing but continuity references?
Yeah.
And if it's only a book for the fans, then why not just publish something that's another new adventure?
Yeah.
Why change the status quo?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So it turns out it was only 12-year-old me that liked it, and everybody else hated the bloody thing.
I think it was. Yes, I remember there was a YouGov poll in about 2010, and there was one recipient who admitted to liking the Eight Doctors, and I guess we all know who that was.
Oh, well, that's really awkward. I thought I'd done that anonymously, but
your browser has a special tag. I don't want to sound like I'm still in any way angry or bitter about the Virgin BBC Books schism or what the BBC Books did with them. I'm over it now. I've moved on.
But you've come on here to take it out on me.
I'm so angry.
So other news at the time, John Pertwee had just died and the tributes poured in, and a random bit of news, Douglas Adams had apparently been losing £30,000 a day playing a new gambling craze called Mahjong. I don't know what that is, but apparently that was news.
I didn't know you could get... I mean, I was very much addicted to that for a while. I don't know that I'd ever play it for money, because I have this sneaking suspicion that I'm not very good at anything that you gamble for money.
Yeah.
It's that thing where you take away the tiles that match until you're left... I used to love it, actually. It's just dawned on me I don't have it anymore. I used to have it on my first ever laptop, which, as you can imagine, was like a sort of 8 foot by 8 foot wooden tablet powered by mice in little wheels. Poor old Douglas Adams. I'm trying to think I think I met him in about 95, 96, 97. It was when they did the illustrated Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
yes,
which was presumably something he did to claw back some of the money he was spaffing up the wall with his gambling addiction. And he came in to do a very nice reading and chat in a bookshop. And at the time he was... I don't know if some version of Sharda had just come out, or
there was usually a version of Sharda out.
Yeah, I mean it feels like most months, but someone in the audience started talking to him about Sharda, and the evening kind of went off the rails at that point. But hopefully it swelled the Adams coffers such that he was able to recoup his gambling losses.
We can only hope. Books out at the time, and there's quite a lot of these, so I'm going to reel them off very quickly. New Adventures, we had The God Engine, Happy Endings, Christmas on a Rational Planet, The Death of Art, Return of the Living Dad. Then Missing Adventures, we had The Sands of Time with the Fifth Doctor and Tegan, Scales of Injustice with the Third Doctor and Liz, the Fourth Doctor and Romana were in The Shadows of Weng Chiang, the Second Doctor, Jamie and Zoe in The Twilight of the Gods, and then The Killing Ground with the Sixth Doctor and his brand new companion, Grant Markham, who only appeared in this one story because they were on the way to losing their licence. Poor old Grant. Poor old Grant.
I believe Grant Markham was was it Alistair Pearson that did the cover and based Grant Markham very much on Alistair Pearson?
Yes, which, I mean, no one gave him any guidance, so why wouldn't you?
Well, no, it's absolutely fair enough. I'm sure there wasn't even enough prose in the book that described what he was supposed to look like to help any sort of passing cover artists do a decent rendering. That was a really great era for the books, wasn't it? I mean, some absolute crackers there. Mainly the New Adventures.
Were you reading them all, or jumping in here and there?
Yes, no, I read all of them. I still have them all. I say that. I still have them all up until October the 4th last year, when the shipping company came to take all my property away from me because they were going to ship it here to America, and they said that would take about 6 weeks, and here we are in late February. So I may or may not still own my complete run of the New Adventures. They might be lost somewhere in the Atlantic.
Somebody might be enjoying them all, reading through them on a desert island after a shipwreck.
I hope they're giving all my clothes a good wearing, because
What the listeners don't realise is when we first spoke about this, we were going to do Transit, but obviously your book did not show up.
Transit has been delayed.
Yes,
let's put it like that.
Transit's in transit.
Yeah, I'm quite glad about that, because I sort of started reviewing like the New Adventures last year, because they were 30 years old last year, and certainly the Time Worm books. So I got really into reading them again, and I thought, well, I can do this every month that comes along and there's an anniversary for one of these books, I can write about it. But that would have taken up an awful lot of what little remains of my life. So I'm glad that I don't have to do that now.
Fair enough. The last few releases out at the time was The Ghosts of N Space on cassette tape, a book by Sophie Aldred and Mike Tucker called Ace, The Inside Story, The End of an Era. On VHS we had I Was a Doctor Who Monster, which was a documentary, the video and script books of the novel, and then Bidding Adieu, which was a Sylvester McCoy video diary of his trip to Vancouver to make the TV movie. Ever experienced any of them?
I mean, no, I have not. What you've encapsulated in that list is some of the more kind of commercial money-grabbing attempts from people to line their pockets, because I suppose it depends if your love for the series comes from a narrative storytelling point of view, or if you're interested in the production. if you're interested in the production, there can't be anything more interesting than watching Sylvester McCoy going, "Oh, here I am in a hotel in Vancouver, and today I'm going to be shot." But I don't need to see that, and I didn't need to see it then, don't need to see it now.
I have seen it. That video is quite interesting in that, so basically Bill Baggs sent Mark Gatiss with a video camera along with Sylvester McCoy, but obviously Mark Gatiss wasn't allowed on set, so it's just him in his trailer, or as you say, him in his hotel in Vancouver, talking about what he's been doing for the day and, you know, how he feels about the whole thing. And I would describe it as largely unremarkable.
Yes, I imagine it probably was. Yeah. And he can't have been there for too long either. I mean, they would have recorded all of his stuff in one go and then sent him packing on the next flight back to wherever he's from. So, he was probably there for a week, maybe, I guess?
I think it's about that, yeah.
Yeah.
He deserved a better send-off, and perhaps he'll guess one in this very podcast.
Too hot for TV.
The Threshold kidnap Ace, Perry and Sarah Jane from their time streams and send them to humanity's collective unconsciousness to be fed to their clients at the Labari, who feed off negative emotion. While the Doctor is reunited with his granddaughter Susan, the Threshold intend to remove the bonding between humans, so only fear and xenophobia are left. Humanity will turn on itself, and the Labari will feed on the fear. Ace blows up the Labari, but is fatally wounded in the blast and dies in the Doctor's arms. The Doctor tells the last Labari to feed on his anger, which distracts it, and Susan materialises the TARDIS inside the creature, killing it. The Doctor vows to stop the Threshold, and the Threshold say they will be ready for him.
Too hot for TV.
Let's talk a little bit about Ground Zero. We're edging very close to the subject of the podcast.
Quick, run.
Were you a reader of the comic strip at the time?
So my full and terrible confession is that I read Doctor Who magazine from August of 1987 through till sometime in 1999, and occasionally I would see a panel of the cartoon strip as I flipped through it, but I was not a reader. I was not in any way invested in the comic strip. I can remember a couple. There was one called A Cold Day in Hell that I think came out in about 1987 that I really enjoyed, but apart from that, it wasn't really for me.
Oh no, I completely understand. I pretty much got into it for the beginning of the 8th Doctor run because I was just desperate for more Paul McGann, as a lot of people were. And I think I pretty much stopped within like a couple of stories in to the 9th Doctor when I was just like, well, this isn't for me anymore.
On the one hand, it's a very obvious thing for that kind of magazine to do because, you know, it's a magazine about a kids' TV show. Let's have a comic strip. But at the same time, it didn't really... I don't feel like it was really serving much of the readership, and certainly by the time the show was cancelled and that readership was just growing older and, you know, going off to university or going off to work or whatever, then once you lose the children, you don't need the cartoon strip, although that's kind of me being a middle-aged man, because I think now graphic novels and narrative storytelling is just such a valuable thing, and the only way of getting boys to read anything. And also it's unstructured, you're not affected by budget limitations or imagination limitations. You can tell any kind of story you want in that medium. And so I think it was the summer of 86. It was before Trial of a Time Lord. And the crisps, Whatsits?
Yes.
They had 6 little Doctor Who comic books free in multi-bags over that summer, and it was they were all Colin Baker, and I absolutely loved them, but I never really put 2 and 2 together and thought I could just stop buying the magazine. It wasn't until a year and a bit later when I saw Sylvester McCoy's grinning face I thought, hello. So, yes, the comic strip was and remains a brilliant thing, but I'm just too narrow, limited and crap to have ever really hitched my wagon to it.
So you've never read this before then?
No, this was my first read through, although there's one panel that I can remember seeing and thinking, at the time, But yeah, this was my first read through.
Cool. Well, we'll get to that panel when we discuss the art in a little bit. But I guess what struck me kind of immediately was, it's something that's carried on in the Eighth Doctor run a little bit, is that even though this is a wild fantasy adventure, it's very much grounded in reality in a way that the TV series only really did in Survival, in the sense that, you know, the references are things like the leaders of the Threshold is from Peckham, and, you know, it's set at Notting Hill Carnival in the future. Admittedly, it's in the future, but those were the sort of references that you didn't really get in kind of current Doctor Who throughout the 80s, apart from towards the very tail end. I was just wondering, do you think that is because perhaps the people in charge of the comic strip are just a little bit younger and have been out and about at this point, as opposed to, say, someone like Eric Saywood?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who would have been involved. I don't know how old they would have been, but you get the feeling that they would have been a much younger group of people, and maybe they had been to their first Notting Hill Carnival, and therefore it's a new thing they can bring into the universe. But yeah, there was an awful lot of those attempts in the 90s to ground stories in a much more detailed setting, and certainly with Ace, who is probably she's been over psychoanalyzed, but she was the only companion to even have much of a backstory.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of stuff about Perivale and boring parts of West London, and as night follows day, then you get things like the Notting Hill Carnival, and yeah, it's good. It's an exciting way of bringing some life into the first 5 panels of a story before you kind of kick off with what's going to happen. Otherwise, you've got a street corner, some chips, drizzle.
Yeah,
you know. This is a really vibrant way to kick the story off.
So, what did you think of it as your first kind of experience?
Well, I think the first 5 or 6 panels were really good, as I say, and then it sort of drifted off into this cosmic sphincter of just basic fanwank, really. I mean, the story, I don't know if I'm allowed to go ahead and talk about the story now, but
yes, say it all.
There's some bloke who's made a deal with some kind of alien grubs to let them invade humanity's subconscious, and that involves bringing back Perry and Sarah Jane and Susan so that the Doctor can meet Perry and Sarah Jane and Susan in his 7th life. They run around a bit, there's a key, there's an escape, then there's a big bang, and then there's a denouement. But it passed the time very well, you know. I
think perhaps there's a little bit, you know, kind of with the use of the classic companions and stuff like that. It probably was more shocking at the time than we're used to now, because we're very used to Big Finish cramming everybody in every story. But actually that was quite rare at the time, I think. I mean, I don't think the New Adventures were particularly big on big mashups of different combinations of people, and even the Missing Adventures sort of steered away from it. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
No, I mean, there was Perry rocked up in one of the New Adventures, Mel popped up in one of the New Adventures. I'm scratching my head to think of any other kind of big continuity fests, and I really don't want to hate on it, but until the 8 Doctors. Yeah. So I suppose this is an age, we're talking about the sort of, you know, mid 90s, where kind of that kind of fanwank hadn't really started yet.
Yeah.
Because people had either moved on or they were still very much swimming in the creative now of the books and so on. So this, I suppose, historically is one of the first things I would point to as being a little bit of a fan service exercise, and it doesn't bear much textual analysis. In at the end of the story, the Doctor returns these 3 companions to where they were taken from, and you think, well, that doesn't make sense then, because if Susan hasn't even left Earth yet, then she wouldn't remember any of this, and Perry was in California, you know, not Thoros Beta.
So I believe they're all pulled from comic strip adventures that happened, because before this, all the comic strips were doing like a random Doctor. There wasn't like a continuing run, and I believe they're all pulled from comic strips over, say, the last 2 years.
Okay, well, that is an interesting way of recycling, I suppose, old doctors and old companions and giving everyone a bit of a brush down and a lick of paint. And actually, I suppose, answering my own question, if you're the sort of person who's reading Doctor Who magazine in 1996, you're absolutely going to love to see some of these faces again, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so. But also, they're essentially three companions dealing with... You've got a limited amount of text, a limited amount of dialogue, a limited amount of panels that you can give to any character, including the companions. So you've essentially got three companions almost doing all the same thing and just sharing the lines.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of a perfunctory exercise. To be fair, I think, Ace was very identifiably Ace. And I think they really got Perry.
Yes.
By making her sort of reluctant and faintly whiny. They managed to recreate almost perfectly Nicola Bryant's performance. Sarah Jane could have been anyone, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, she wasn't particularly well drawn. And Susan, having just watched all of the First Doctor's era for my day job on All of Time and Space, I'm never that excited to see Susan cropping up, even if it's an amnesiac Susan or whatever. It's like, oh, yeah, no, whatever. Oh.
Yeah, I do like there's a bit of bickering between Perry and Ace, which I think, of course, those two wouldn't get on if you put them together.
Yes.
As you say, Sarah Jane could have been anybody. And the Susan reunion is a bit of, it's just a bit meh. You would think, even if she's a younger version of Susan that we haven't really met before, you would think that the Doctor would be slightly more overwhelmed by seeing her. But no, she just kind of stands around and tells the story slightly and doesn't do anything for 4 of the 5 sort of parts of it.
It's true. It's one of the big sort of open goals of Doctor Who's past, even in the 5 Doctors, where, she's reunited with the 5th Doctor. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't want to talk to her. I don't think he even actually makes eye contact with her. They're so keen to keep her at arm's length from established continuity, so we don't have to talk about whether Time Lords have winkies or do naughty sexes with ladies and have babies. But at the same time, she's someone that there's always this desire to bring back, and there was all that speculation during season 10 of the new series. Is Susan coming back? Because we've seen a photograph of her on the Doctor's desk. We love Susan. Susan's really important. Oh, Susan.
Do you think Susan should come back?
I think if you do that, then you need to address categorically, is she the Doctor's granddaughter? Which, yes, she is. But I think as soon as you do that story and you bring her back and you answer that question, you're going to lose, a few thousand middle-aged English guys who can't bear that kind of naughtiness. But at the same time, is there anything interesting to do with that character?
It's weird you say that, because the same people that probably want Susan back will be the first people to complain and leave the show when they do eventually do, if they did eventually do it.
Absolutely. There'll be the angry brigade on Twitter will be like, oh, finally Susan's back, hashtag my Doctor Who, and within 2 minutes of her being on screen they'll be saying, well, this is even worse than the Chris Chibnall era. So in that context, no one's going to want to bring Susan back.
Yeah.
Russell T Davies is not going to be sitting there going, oh, I know what would be fantastic for the 60th, I'll bring Susan back. It's just no.
I think there's an interesting story to be told about the abandonment of Susan, but I think it's best for these sort of things. I don't think it's something you'd want to see on TV.
It doesn't really reflect well on the Doctor. I mean, he's obviously left companions in fairly diverse predicaments throughout the last 60 years, but this is a relative. This is someone, when he lost Clara, he made quite a big deal of, I have a duty of care, and it's like, yeah, but you left your granddaughter in London with a man with a ridiculously thrusting hairdo who was clearly a bad one. It's not one of the Doctor's finest moments, and to revisit it would only sort of really chip away at the character that's been built up ever since that happened. I think.
And also, obviously, if she is a Time Lord, and that's what they reveal, then he's left her somewhere where she's essentially going to watch everybody she knows age and die really rapidly. And she's just sat there twiddling her thumbs.
Well, I suppose you could argue it's part of maybe a Seventh Doctor master plan. So
yes,
so Susan goes through that, so she becomes some kind of really, like him, a really noble Time Lord who's capable of seeing the bigger picture that much quicker. So that he's made her a force for good, and maybe she's been running around the universe like him, doing wonderful things for 60 years as well. But we're never going to see it, I don't think.
Well, unsurprisingly, Big Finish did that box set called Susan's War, didn't they? About what she did in what she was doing in the Time War.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
But it's got Daleks and Sensorites. That's all you need to know.
Oh, what a mashup! That's what everyone's been waiting for. Some old men in felt and some Daleks and Susan and the Time War. If only they'd got Jago and Lightfoot in there somehow, it would have, I think, ticked every box that anyone could possibly have had.
Now, I'm not saying Jago and Lightfoot aren't in there. I've never listened to it, so they might be.
The chances are that, India Fisher will be in there. And
So, Ground Zero was written by Scott Gray.
Right.
I think it's quite a simple but effective story. The Threshold are employed by some giant spiders, essentially, who want to feed off humanity's xenophobia, pretty much.
Right. Well, that's a good thing. Let them eat all of it. We don't need that particular emotion.
No, it's true.
No story there. The Doctor would be like, "Oh, I don't care. Let them eat it." Right.
Was it compelling enough story to keep you entertained and interested for however many pages?
Yes, it was. And again, I think because I'm now of an age and a mindset where I am more interested in the stories rather than the medium. You're able to look at a comic strip as being, someone really unencumbered by a production office or the demands of a production schedule. You can just see someone's pure thought and ideas. And it was, it was a kind of, I don't want to say underwhelming, purely because I don't know how the story then continues, and I get the sense that these bad guys were going to recur quite a lot.
They do. They're the main bad guys for the first run of Eighth Doctor comics, essentially.
Well, that's good, and this is a great way to introduce them, but it did feel like kind of a low-stakes story in terms of it being the departure. I've given away the trousers there. Someone doesn't make it through the story alive. It feels like that person has overcome so much in her career travelling with the Doctor that she's really not going to fall foul of some giant mites.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's a farewell story for Ace. Ace dies, but also, in theory, it's a farewell for the Seventh Doctor, because how it's supposed to work continuity-wise is he then goes to San Francisco and is gunned down 10 minutes later.
Okay, that would explain why he's wearing that particular coat.
And you get the TARDIS destroyed, ready to be regenerated into the TV movie one. So it's supposed to be a finale for both of them. And in that kind of retrospectively, having those old companions there is a bit, I guess it's a bit like when the 10th Doctor goes and visits everybody for 25 minutes at the end of his final story.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, because I suppose I didn't realise this was the Seventh Doctor's last story. And you think if they were consciously building the strip up to that kind of moment, wouldn't they have arranged to have published the final episode in May, for example? Wouldn't that have made slightly more sense?
Funny you should say this. They weren't building up to this moment. Ground Zero was supposed to be a big relaunch for the Seventh Doctor and Ace after they'd been jumping around doing standalone stories for each of the Doctors.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, the TV movie happens. And we always think of the TV movie kind of taking years and years to happen. But really, once it finds its home at Fox or anything, it's like, we've got a script, let's go and make it. And it's in the space of about 2 or 3 months that essentially this happens. So what happens is, at DWM, they're suddenly like, oh, well, I guess this is his last story. And then they were like, what happens with Ace? They got hold of the script for the TV movie, and they were like, oh, it doesn't even mention Ace. And they were like, well, what can we do with Ace? And at one point they thought about mortally wounding her and putting her in stasis. But then they were like, well, then the whole of the Eighth Doctor's comic thread will have to be him kind of trying to save Ace, and it just didn't seem right for that character. So they actually had to tie everything. They were setting up the threshold, that was always the plan, but they had to tie up everything quite quickly.
Well, I think given that context, then I think they did a really good job with this, because it does feel very much like I mean, obviously I've only known this for the last 10 minutes, so I'm still, processing it. But it does feel like a really good lead-in to the TV movie and the events in that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, killing off Ace was absolutely the right thing to do in terms of not having her hanging around. She could equally have decided to maybe stay at the future Notting Hill Carnival. I mean, yeah, that might be a kinder thing to do. But
I'd rather be there than be blown up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would. I think if you gave people the choice, more people would choose Carnival over blown up.
Yes, most people would. She gets a couple of good moments before she goes. She uses the Seventh Doctor's umbrella to stab one of these creatures in the mouth, and obviously she goes out blowing up a monster with Nitro 9. I don't think it's the perfect send-off for her, but it's just about okay in my book.
Yeah, I think if they'd gone into that story knowing, it was going to be the last one for that Doctor and that companion, and that they were going to kill the companion off, then I think they would have done something much more kind of overblown and dramatic and heroic. But that could equally have been quite fanwanky, so I think this was a good kind of organic way to do it.
I mean, there was a world where Sophie Aldred said this at the time. I don't know whether Philip Siegel's ever corroborated it, but he did say to her, I really tried to get you in the TV movie, and she would have essentially been gunned down with the Seventh Doctor and not survived.
Jesus Christ. Why bother paying someone that kind of money for that kind of cameo? I mean, I didn't really think about this consciously until I started listening to the Blue Box podcast, and they were always saying, the TV movie was great apart from the first 5 minutes, and they're absolutely right in retrospect. When you look at how to relaunch a big franchise, and everyone always looks at Rose as being the perfect example of that, you don't put loads of continuity in for no reason, just at the front, just to deter anyone who's wavering on your threshold. So to have, what would she have been by then? About 30, a 30-year-old Sophie Aldred pretending to be 16 years old again. Yeah. It would have been a terrible thing.
It would. But they probably wouldn't have got to speak. So, I mean, who knows? So, the art is by Martin Geraghty and Bambos Gregu, or Georgio. Georgio? Let's say it's Georgio.
I read it very quickly. I thought it was Bamba Gascoigne. Who we've sadly lost in the last week or so. So sorry, Bamba.
You mentioned earlier that there was one recognisable image, but I guess, so what is that, and are there any other things that stuck out to you?
So the final full-page image from episode 4 is obviously the Doctor cradling Ace's dying or dead body, and he looks faintly kind of devilish. I think the way he's kind of, his face is in shadow or whatever, managed to create a very strong sense that he was actually really rather pissed off about things.
Yes.
Which makes for a wonderful cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I think the art in general, it's quite interesting. So the former companions that come back, they're all done brilliantly, and obviously they had fun drawing Perry, yes, and they got a very good likeness to base Sarah Jane's face off, blah, blah. There was some kind of, screen accurate art, but some of the Seventh Doctor pictures were kind of hit and miss. He goes from looking like a very jowly 60-year-old man to looking like he did in Time in the Rani to this, that, and the other. And I'm trying to really. It doesn't feel like a disunited product, but within it there's a lot of wiggle room, and a lot of, I guess, some of it was done in a bit of a rush, maybe.
Several people who have drawn for the magazine have said Sylvester McCoy is the hardest Doctor to kind of get a likeness for.
Now, I take issue with that.
Go on.
Because anyone who's ever collected the Target books will see 12 brilliant renderings of the Seventh Doctor, And everyone who grew up as a kid in the early 80s and got the kind of painted calendars will remember that no one could do Peter Davison. And surely his face is the hardest Doctor to... Who have you seen more terrible pictures of?
I mean, it is a toss-up between those two. Now, I would say the New Adventure covers, there's some questionable-looking McCoys on them.
You're quite right. I'm thinking instinctively of The Highest Science
Yes.
and White Darkness.
Yeah. I feel like between the two of them, they've kind of got it covered. And certainly having done a number of Seventh Doctor comic strips on this podcast, you know, he very rarely looks consistently like the same character.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to look like the sort of wide-eyed, grinning idiot version of the Seventh Doctor. It can be a sort of more, you know, placid and brooding Doctor, but just within your one story, just always draw him as the same human being.
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, if I was going to give advice to anyone, that's what I'd say.
I do think there's some great images in it, though. You get, like, the streets melting and turn to quicksand with the companions running through them. Then we get this huge, giant, twisted sort of Santa that feels very Tim Burton.
Yes.
Giant spiders, a sky full of dreaming people, and then the destroyed TARDIS. Like, they're all quite striking images, I think.
They're brilliant images. The sky full of sleeping people reminds me of the cover of the Virgin New Adventure novel Deceit, which has something very similar in the background. And I'm quite worried now with this whole people fighting giant spiders, because I wrote these books and every so often there'd be some giant spiders that would turn up. They were called the Arachna. They were quite fun.
Right.
But people would fight them often quite brutally. But I don't think I stole them from this, because I only read it this morning. So that's okay. No, you're right. There's a very sort of Christopher Nolan energy behind the sequence where the street sort of goes liquidy and becomes this sticky morass of stuff.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I was saying about you're free to do whatever you want in this medium, and you don't need to be deterred by the fact that your production team won't be able to pull it off in a visual realization. You can absolutely go large with your big mechanical evil Santa monster thing, which I think was there for like one page before it revealed it was one of the big spider creature things. So it was just a really good sort of dream sequence moment in a sort of Deadly Assassin, we're all in the Matrix kind of way, you know.
And there's a lovely panel of the Doctor just giving Susan a hug goodbye, which I thought was well done. And it's just nice to see those images sometimes. And then sort of finally we get in the last episode this vengeful Seventh Doctor. Do you like your Doctor to be ruthless and vengeful?
I like my Seventh Doctor to be ruthless and vengeful.
Yeah.
That's what he's there for. He may not have really grown into that during his time on TV, but I think throughout the 90s, in whatever medium you look at, be it audio or be it the novels, they really leaned heavily into that idea that the Doctor was this dark, vengeful manipulator, and it always works for me. It always gets me.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm an absolute slut for that.
I mean, and here he literally materialises the TARDIS inside one of the creatures to kill it.
Now that amazed me, because that's one of those things like when the Phantom Menace came out and someone sort of stuck a lightsaber against someone's tummy and turned it on, so it burned right through. That's one of the things as a 5-year-old you always wanted to see, but you never thought you would.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was actually really kind of like, oh wow, that's you're not mucking about anymore, are you? Wow. So yeah, that was possibly the best takeaway from this story, and I don't mean that in a damning way on any of the rest of it, but I think the idea that the Doctor can be that ruthless and brutal when he's that cross, I think is a fascinating idea.
Is there anything else you particularly want to say about this story? Anything that you're burning to say?
I would say no.
Okay, good. Would you say it's a clanger or a banger?
Given that I know very little about the cartoons and the comic strips, I would assume it's a banger.
Yeah, I would say it's largely well thought of, and I think just for kind of that iconic image of the Doctor carrying a dead ace, it's sort of well thought of and sort of ties things up. So it's a banger from me.
Too hot for TV.
Well, it appears me and Ian waffled on for far too long, just getting to know a bit about him and his love for Doctor Who, and then Ground Zero. When we finally got to Death Comes to Time, we waffled on even longer. So I've taken the executive decision of splitting this podcast into two. You've got the first part here, and the second part will be out in a week or so on the Too Hot for TV feed. If you want to find Ian on Twitter, he's at the Iain Martin, or his fantastic podcast with Mark Cockerham, All of Time and Space, is on Twitter at alltimen, that's N space pod. All Time N Space Pod. So go check it out. It's well worth a listen. But until next time, I've been Dylan. There's nobody else here right now, so I've just been Dylan. And this has been Doctor Who, Too Hot for TV. We'll be back.
Too hot for TV.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, hang on, I've lost you.
Oh no.
Oh no, there you go.
Oh, good,
I was reading.
good. This is what happens when you introduce someone as being like a revolving host, like on Have I Got News for You? I'm clearly going to be the Boris Johnson, if you'll allow me to use language like that at this early juncture.
Well, maybe this will be the boost to your career that ultimately puts you in power of the country.
Yes.
Well, we can only hope.
Too hot for TV.
I'll probably call the episode Eric Saywood's Circle Jerk, though, after... I think.
What a mental image. Oh, him in the middle like a soggy biscuit.
The soggiest biscuit of them all.
Oh.